Long Fallen Dynasty is here, and I've got
big tips,
little tips,
regular sized tips, some super secret hidden never before seen. You won't believe this next one, it'll change your life tips. Is that enough hype and clickbait for you? Let's get into my tips for Long Fallen Dynasty. Before we get into this is part 2 of my beginner's guide for Long Fallen Dynasty. The first part breaks down all the systems, the morale rank, fortitude, the virtues, all that stuff. So if you're interested in those things, go watch that one. But let's get into this one. And we'll start with currencies. Now, there are 3 currencies in Long Fallen Dynasty. The first is genuine chi, which is the most important. And this is like your souls, I guess, if you want to talk in Dark Souls terms, or runes, if you want to talk in Elden Ring terms. And when you die, you will lose half of your genuine chi. You won't lose all of them, unlike some other Souls-like games. The interesting thing here as well is that you never have to go and pick these up. So say if you die to an enemy, in order to get your chi back, you need to defeat that enemy. You will gain your morale rank and your chi back from defeating that enemy, except in boss encounters. As soon as you enter that boss room, you'll get that chi back. So you won't actually lose any of your genuine chi, but you just will have to beat that boss in order to keep it with you. Next is copper. Now, copper is just your basic currency. You'll use copper at the blacksmith to upgrade any of your gear or buy new equipment, anything from items or gear, whatever it may be, from the vendor. And you'll earn copper just from defeating enemies. You won't lose any when you do die, but you will earn it just at a steady pace as you defeat enemies in the world. The third is accolades. Now, this one is a little less seen or mentioned really. Now, accolades you get by defeating enemies that defeated another player. So not you, but like another player in their own world. These enemies will have kind of like a bluish, purplish glow on their morale rank, and typically around them, they'll have these like flags that you can interact with to increase your morale rank for a short period of time. But it's really a trade-off whether you want to waste a dragon pot on that or not. But defeating these enemies will give you accolades. Sometimes it'll give you tiger seals, but accolades is the main thing. The main thing you do with accolades is you go to a gentleman at the hidden village. Now, talking to him, you can bring up the accolades reward menu where you can trade in accolades for various items, as well as like a loot box roll, I guess, on any kind of swords or other equipment, armor, that sort of thing. It's a pretty quick way to get gear of like a specific star rating. Say if you want a sword that's like 3 or 4 star, you can go in there and run that roll to see if you get like a good one that you may actually want to use. Combat is the focus in this game, so we're going to break down a ton of combat information. Firstly, let's talk about the spirit gauge. Now, the spirit gauge is this little bar like next to your health bar that it can either be in a positive or a negative state. When you use normal attacks, they won't actually use any of your spirit gauge. If you connect a normal attack, it will increase your spirit gauge, potentially putting you into the normal side. Now, you have a normal, just like basic attack, and a spirit attack, which in other games would be like your heavy attack. Spirit attacks cost some of your spirit gauge, so you will have to have some in order to use them, but landing a spirit attack on an enemy will damage their spirit gauge and make it smaller, so their spirit gauge won't be like as big, if that makes sense. If you are in the positive in your spirit gauge, when you use a spirit attack, it'll be like empowered and deal like more damage. Now, your spirit gauge is affected by other things as well. Martial arts, essentially Ash of Wars from like an Elden Ring, for example, like weapon skills, when you use these, they will consume some of your spirit gauge. Same as wizardry spells, so if you're using any of the magic spells, it will consume some. And then things like blocking as well as dodging or deflecting consume some of your spirit gauge. If you successfully deflect an attack, it will actually give you some spirit gauge back, but if you don't, it'll just consume some of your spirit gauge. If you run out of spirit gauge, you'll enter kind of like a stance broken state where you're vulnerable to take damage, and you want to avoid this as much as possible. So keeping an eye on it is a really good thing to do. Treat it like your stamina is a good way to think about it. Stealth is a great way to defeat enemies without even having to worry about any of your spirit gauge things, or attacking enemies from above. A lot of the environments and battlefields will have some sort of verticality that you can climb to get above to do a fatal attack from above on enemies. This will one-shot most basic enemies and deal heaps of damage to larger enemies. Larger enemies, it'll like knock them down and you'll be able to follow up with attacks before they actually get up. Range combat is also valuable in a similar way, in that you can pull enemies, say if there's a group of enemies or even enemies on the higher ground, further back, that sort of thing. You don't want to take on everyone at once. You can pull enemies with ranged combat by shooting them with your bow or crossbow, and they'll just come and fight you. Speaking of dodging over a minute ago, what a smooth transition by Norza right there. We also need to talk about equipment load. So equipment load works similar to other games, and the heavier armor that you put on, the more stamina or spirit gauge you'll consume when you are like dodging or any of those kind of things. Now you can check this in your status menu. You can see what your current proportion of your total equip max load is, and then what your current status number is. So if it's like A or B, you're pretty much going to be able to do the proper like light armor roll without having to worry about any of your spirit gauge usage. But then as it gets into the D kind of range, you'll do a bit more of a slow actual roll rather than like a dodge. And then once it's overloaded, it's very slow and it consumes so much spirit gauge to actually just in order to be able to roll. Now, depending on your build and what kind of playstyle you're having, it's really up to you what armor you're going to use and the equipment load that you're going to use. But it's just to be mindful of your equipment load and how it does affect your spirit gauge. Along with stealth and doing fatal attacks from behind or in above enemies, I found that status effects are the most effective way to defeat enemies and applying those status effects to enemies. Each of the virtues that have a wizardry spell linked to them will have a corresponding status effect. So say for wood, this is like lightning, electricity. For fire, this is obviously burn, and water is ice and chill, that sort of thing. You will want to make sure you're using one or two of these status effects regularly in combat, especially against the harder enemies, and applying these status effects, not only because they increase your overall effectiveness in combat significantly because of the amount of damage and effects that they apply to that enemy, but also there are enemies that are resistant to certain effects. It's also worth pointing out as well that some enemies may put themselves on fire as like a buff, and you can put that out with say a water effect, or vice versa. If they're using a lightning effect, you can put that out with earth, for example. All these status effects and what they are and how to stop them, apply them, that sort of thing, it's all explained in the section in Encyclopedia and status effects as well. So make sure you're reading those just so you understand how they all work. The Dragon Pot is your healing flask. Now, this can be increased the amount of charges that you have by the Dragon Vein crystals and the actual recovery effect by Dragon Vein essences. You'll find these just out exploring in the battlegrounds, even in sub battlefields, like the side battlefields that you can just like go and do that aren't part of the main story. So it's worth doing those if you are struggling with flasks and you're looking to upgrade them. It's also worth mentioning, just in general, in terms of struggling, I guess, that your morale rank is super critical to your overall success. I talked all about this in that other video, but if you're struggling with a boss and you're stuck, increasing your morale rank to that limit of 25 is significantly important to your overall success, because the boss will always be at morale rank 20, and if you're 5 levels above, that you will take less damage from them, you'll do more damage to them. It just gives you a nice, like, cozy kind of barrier to make that fight a little bit easier for you. Let's get into some upgrade tips. Firstly, we'll talk about respecking. Once you've unlocked the secret village, you can respec here for no cost at all and any time you like. It's also worth mentioning that you can actually set builds. So in the battle flag, if you go there and go to battle preparation, there's battle sets, and you can actually like save build configurations here. So you can freely tinker with builds by respecking for free and playing around with any armor, weapons, etc. that you like. And then in here, you can actually go and change your battle sets to apply different builds. And saving multiple builds, or say if you're fighting a boss that, you know, has really strong flame resistance and you're using a flame build, if you've saved a build that's say a water build, for example, right? And then you can play around with chill, you can switch between that build and switch between them freely once you're out and actually finding enemies. Loot in this game is also random. It's defined by your luck stat, which you can increase just by the secondary stats on all of your gear, but you will find gear of various rarities up to like the 4-star gold rarity as you're out exploring. Enemies can drop this. There is some pieces that are like static, especially if you defeat battlegrounds, you'll always get like a certain set of things and it tells you what those things are. And you can get gear specifically from your allies. If you max them out and become a sworn brother to them, they'll give you a copy of their gear, which is then the other static gear that you can get. The rest of it is random. If you want more stuff on allies, go and check out that video I mentioned earlier. At the blacksmith, you can upgrade your weapons and armor with the various rank X whatever of steel and the leather that you get. Once she has settled in the secret village, which will happen when you unlock it, you'll also get access to jewel embedding. This is a significant upgrade and a great way to improve your combat power. So the jewels that you'll be changing is like the passive effects on that piece of gear. Now you can remove any of the passive effects on the piece of gear, and the higher the rarity of the gear, the more passive effects it will have. So you can remove them and add different ones that are more beneficial to your build. From what I have found, the passive effects that are on basically every piece of gear don't logically make sense for the gear that they are a part of. So changing these to actually relevant passives for your build is really beneficial. For example, I'm using a fire build with this like pole weapon. So I want to increase my flame attack power and like my damage dealt, that sort of stuff, and a little bit of lightning because I am using some sort of lightning in this build as my secondary status effect that I apply. In order to get the jewel fragments to be able to do the jewel embedding, you need to salvage gear. Now, because the loot is random and you're going to get absolutely tons of it just as you're out exploring, you can just go into salvaging and sell sell heaps of it. You will need some copper to upgrade your gear and, you know, go through this kind of menu stuff with the blacksmith. And copper is a resource that I found runs out very quickly, and the best way to get it back is by just selling jewel fragments to the vendor. For some reason, one jewel fragment is worth 1,000 copper, and because you get so many jewel fragments for all the different gear that you can break down with her, you'll just have like thousands of jewel fragments that you can just sell to get copper. So basically, you'll just never run out of money. You can just sell jewel fragments, get some copper back, and then go and do any of the upgrades and stuff that you want to do. And that is everything that I've got for you today. Make sure you go and watch the other tips video. I'll have more content coming out for Wolong, including a build like that build we just talked about a little bit ago. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.